Hi, and welcome to Classical Stuff You Should Know, a podcast about classical stuff, the classical world, old books, nothing new. Sometimes music, sometimes architecture, philosophy, theology, classical education, and we are three guys who like that stuff. My name is Graham Donaldson, and I am with Thomas Magby.
Hello.
And AJ Hannenberg.
That's me.
And today we are taking a sharp right-hand turn, and we are talking about farm animals, specifically donkeys.
That's exactly right. So,
Magby, as our resident expert in farm animals,
yeah, exactly.
Please teach us about the ways of the donkey.
Okay, so the donkey is a domesticated member of the horse family Equidae, the wild ancestor of the donkey.
This is amazing. Are donkeys the ones that can't have other donkeys?
That's what I thought was true. I'm trying to get to that part.
Donkeys can't have donkeys?
I'm also trying to read the donkey Wikipedia page without saying the butt word, and it's I'm having to skip over lots of sentences. The donkey has been used as a working animal. How many years has the donkey been?
Or is it a mule? Maybe mules can't have.
Yeah.
I think it's a mule. I think a mule is like when a donkey and a horse have a kid, it's a mule. Is that it?
A female horse and a male donkey have a mule.
There you go. And that mule cannot propagate
mules
future
cannot have
mules.
babies of their own.
Oh, man.
They are sterile. Yeah. Okay. How long have donkeys been in use as working animals?
Oh, my word. Like
since
20 years.
4,000 BC.
Yeah.
It's at least 5,000 years.
Oh, man.
I'm really committed to this bit.
So there's
I feel
donkeys.
like, wait, that's okay.
Oh my gosh.
5,000 years. They're just throwing out a number at that point because that's like where history begins. So like when it started. I'll tell you when.
There were donkeys there for
when
sure.
history started.
Yeah.
When as far back as we know.
How many donkeys are there in the world?
But today is a specific donkey named Hote.
Nice try. How many donkeys are there in the world?
How in the world would they know?
I don't. There's no source on this.
Is there a donkey registry?
That's
like,
exactly right.
If I'm a farmer and I have a new donkey, I'm like, well, better call the donkey registry. How do they know? I call beef. It's like that same statistic about people swallowing spiders.
Yeah, the 8 spiders a year thing.
Yeah, I've brought that up, I think, before, that I think that's total hogwash.
Why?
I regret bringing up the donkey joke.
Oh, no.
Talking
I'm
about
going to be
Donkey
committed to this. Look, we have another hour of me reading the Wikipedia page. I hope you're proud of yourself, Graham.
But yeah, like, how do they know how many spiders people swallow in a year?
They study it.
How?
They watch all of us every night.
Or like, even
You
if
got a smartphone, don't you?
they like watch one person while they sleep.
Wasn't your smartphone?
And that
tracking
person
where you
swallows
go?
a few spiders.
Yep.
Like, I would just be worried about the cleanliness of the lab.
That's funny. Have you seen the CGP grade video where he talks about the spider eating thing? And he's like, the statistic is that a person eats 8 spiders every year. And he goes, no, that's totally false. He goes, most people don't eat any spiders, but one person has 1,000.
One person's just munching. They like sleepwalk and just find spider nests and chow the
This
whole
is terrifying.
40 million donkeys was the correct answer. So
correct.
Yeah,
in quotes.
Nailed it. Okay. We are actually talking about Don Quixote today. So anyway, instead of me reading that fascinating Wikipedia page to all of you, do you all have any background with this book? Have you read it? What's your...
I tried my best and got bored.
I've never read it.
It's true. I started and it seemed like there was no real thread to it. And granted, I just did a podcast where there seemed to be no thread
real
to
thread
it.
to it. Yeah. Is there not enough violence in this book for you?
There's not enough talking severed heads and bird speak and dragon hearts, and it's
a sitcom, right? Don Quixote?
You're
I
cutting
don't know.
to the punchline.
I got bored because it didn't
correct.
seem like it was going anywhere. Is it like the Seinfeld of the book world?
Oh my
gosh. It's about nothing?
Yes, absolutely. That's why it's perfect. Graham, have you read this book before?
I've never watched an episode of Seinfeld. I'm serious.
Is that actually true?
I'm serious.
You're missing out.
I never have.
Dude, we have
some work
watching to do. Haven't you also not seen Terminator or something?
I haven't seen Terminator 2.
Oh my gosh.
I watched the first one.
Yeah,
it was all right.
Second one's better.
Yeah.
And all of the ones after that are trash, correct?
I don't know to what you refer.
There are no movies after Terminator 2. That's like what are all the memes on Twitter that are like, I'm going to tell my children there are only 2 Godfather movies, like,
and one Matrix film.
and one Matrix film. Yeah, I'm okay with all of this.
Matrix 4 is coming out.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Is it supposed to be
They're
good?
filming it.
Is Keanu Reeves in it?
Bill and Ted 3 just came out.
Yeah, I saw that. That's
Just
insane
came
to
out.
me. Yeah, I don't understand.
I watched it. It was great.
Was it good?
I really
When you
enjoyed
say
it.
great, do you mean Bill and Ted great, or do you mean like actual great?
Bill and Ted great.
Okay, yeah, that's acceptable. Okay, speaking of Bill and Ted, we're going to be talking about they don't meet Don Quixote. They don't meet Cervantes. Do they? Anyway, I don't remember that first movie very well. Okay, so we are going to be talking about Don Quixote. It is a book, and it's very good. So just you all shared a little bit of your background with this. My first exposure to Don Quixote was in high school. I remember being so excited to read Don Quixote in its original Spanish. So this was a part of Spanish 5 at the school. I'm sure this is at most public schools, but I remember being so excited to finally get to the point where like my knowledge of the Spanish language would be so good that I would be ready for Don Quixote.
And
Studied for 4 years, made it into Spanish 5, got there. Did not understand a word of it. Literally made no sense to me. I remember the teacher reading through it, and there's a joke about Don Quixote's name in the first chapter about how it sounds a lot like cheesecake, which is the word quejada. And I just remember my teacher just like giggling to herself, and I'm like, literally no idea what's going on here. So this is great. So had a horrible first experience with it because, also I was a pretty lazy student, so I didn't put in the work to learn very much about it. But I imagine it's a similar experience to Sarah studied Italian in college and still keeps up with it. And so when she tries to read like Dante, it's a different Italian than the one that is spoken now. In the same way, it's an older Spanish. It's from the 1600s, so it's just a very different language. So that was a bummer. So I think I read like the first 2 chapters as a part of that class and then stopped that. Eventually I came back to the book through Susan Weisbauer's book, The Well-Educated Mind. Is this a book that you all have you all read this one before? The Well-Educated Mind? Do you have any affiliation or, have you read anything by Susan Weisbauer, I guess?
Yeah, she's come to the school to talk.
Yep.
And The Well-Educated Child, is that what it's called?
The Well-Trained Mind.
The Well-Trained Mind. I've read The Well-Trained Mind.
Okay. I don't understand. This feels like a distinction without a difference in the title.
Educated versus trained?
Yeah.
So I have not read Well-Trained Mind. This one is, the subtitle is A Guide to the Classical Education You Never Had. The format is to
How presumptuous.
Of all people to teach on this, I think she's qualified. Presumptuous
Who's to say that I
have never had a classical education?
It's true, though.
I will. So there's a little bit of setup in the beginning, which is essentially equivalent to Mortimer Adler's How to Read a Book. And then she goes into these different sections that are basically groupings of books recommended around a common theme. The first set of books around a theme is the theme of a journey, taking a journey. And so it starts with Don Quixote and it ends with Cormac McCarthy's The Road. Oh. So quite bookends to have there. And there are many that are in between. So
that book is a bummer.
Sure. Well, carry the flame, man.
Carry the flame.
I never thought of Cormac McCarthy as like a sprightly, happy-go-lucky author.
I feel like
Blood Meridian doesn't exactly.
That's what I was going to say. Blood Meridian does not really like.
It's not really a party.
It gets you. You're not happy by the end of that book, or in the middle of the book.
Is something that happens nowhere in that book.
But carry the flame is kind of I don't know. There's something to that. Anyway, so this is when I first started at Veritas. I think I read this book, and I was like, I'm going to read through every one of these book lists. I'm going to follow all these themes. Like, it's going to be awesome. And
Look at you.
Well, stick with me because I made it halfway through the first book on the first list, and I still haven't finished it. So anyway, sorry.
Well, welcome to...
What was the first book, can I ask?
This is Don Quixote. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Don Quixote is the first book on the first list.
Well, welcome to the intellectual life, Magby.
Yes, it is.
Where you read half a book and tell everyone else that you read the whole thing.
No, it's where you get bogged down. You realize, I've made a terrible mistake.
Terrible. But I enjoyed that mistake, I guess is what I'm saying. So Don Quixote is like 1,000 pages. So if, again, you've probably seen this book before and been like super intimidated at it because it's so long, and I'm here to tell you that you should not be intimidated at it, and it's great, and everyone should read it. So I'm 9 minutes in. That's my entire, thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
So you were asking what do we know about it?
Sure.
The only thing that I've heard people talk about it is that it is like a book that bridges the end of the Middle Ages to sort of more of a Renaissance in Spain. So you've got this character that's trying to hold on to the old ways, and he's coming up against the new ways. Is that fair?
Sure. You are giving it too much credit, which is great. This is also I've had a few instances that have made me think I'm leaving Grahamland and moving to AJ Land because I read T.S. Eliot over the summer and hated it.
Welcome.
Christianity and Culture and his book of poetry.
You didn't like Christianity and Culture?
No, but maybe it's just because I'm dumb. But it
didn't make you want to be like a smarmy British Anglican?
I'm already I'm a smarmy American Anglican, so I got that going for me.
I have so many questions.
Elliot did this annoying. Anyway, this is not an Elliot episode, but he would do this annoying thing where he would like have a chapter that makes no sense, and then the opening paragraph of the next chapter is, okay, so what I said in the last chapter was this, and I'm like, well, just give me that one paragraph. That's all I needed.
Oh, that's infuriating.
And then his Graham is the one who made the book list for the summer, so I can pin all of this on you. But there's a requirement on there to read a book of poetry of
What did you read?
T.S. Eliot, of course.
Oh, why?
Because I'm an idiot.
Oh.
And the T.S. Eliot book of poetry has like 4 or 5 poems that are in French. And I think I comprehended them about as much as the ones that were in English. So it was, anyway.
Should have done Ouden.
Should have. You recommended that even, so that's on me. Anyway.
They're poets I love.
So I had those things happen. And then in trying to prepare for an episode, when people talk about Don Quixote, it's like, the first novel, or the first novel that like we still have. There might have been some before that, or what you're talking about. It's like this confluence of these great cultural forces. But when you actually read it, it's like it's a dumb buddy. It's not buddy cops, but like it's a dumb buddy comedy.
It's a bromance.
It's a bromance story essentially, with an idiot as the main character and like a really smart kind of second in command guy. And it does not take itself seriously at all. And if you read any like meaning into this book, you're really dumb. Like it's just a bunch of really funny stories. And anyway, as I was reading it, I'm like, listen, AJ would love this book. So I'm bummed to hear that
AJ, why didn't you like it? Maybe
that's my
maybe
question.
you read a bad translation.
It's very possible the translation was bad.
Sure.
They didn't realize it was funny. That was something you were saying before.
That's one of our 4 points for today.
Oh.
So,
I also
Stealing
think
your
I
pocket.
attempted
okay.
it when I was
you want the book? I can.
less developed, like 3 years ago.
That's fair.
I don't know.
Like before you hit puberty? Like
Yeah.
Why?
AJ's like 18 right now. Yeah, great, perfect. If you could talk like that for the rest of this.
Tell them windmills.
Again, if I committed to the donkey book or the donkey bit, you need to commit to the adolescence bit. So do it. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about the guy who wrote this book, Cervantes. It's yeah, and then we'll go into a little bit of the overview of the book. I've already said this. I've only read through the first part of the book. It's published in I guess. For people who've actually read this book, I've read about half of the book is what I'm trying to say. The first part is split into like 5 other parts. I'm saying I've read those first 5 parts, so get at me. Do you all know anything about Miguel de Cervantes?
do not.
He's a dude. He's
Spanish.
Spanish dude, born around 1547, but this is I guess similar to Shakespeare. We don't really know when Cervantes was born because he wasn't an important dude. He's the 4th kid out of 7. He's so like literally the middleest of kids of this family of 7, and didn't have a lot interesting happen in his life for a really long time. He
That sounds real nice, actually.
to just be a dude.
Yeah, just have like a life where not a lot.
Just hanging out.
Just hanging out.
I say not a lot happens.
If you have an interesting life, chances are.
Things will go poorly.
Yeah.
I say he has a boring life, but his first like professional job is to be a soldier, which I guess is, it's pretty cool.
Never mind.
I think he gets shot in the hand at some point.
Woof.
He's imprisoned while trying to return home from his soldiering duties, and he is a prisoner of war for 5 years. Kind of a gap of not knowing what happens. He becomes a purchasing agent for the government, which sounds so boring. In 1592, he becomes a tax collector. Still has not really done a whole lot of significance. He's still just kind of a guy. But eventually starts to writing this story, the story about this guy, Don Quixote, who we will talk about in a second. He will eventually publish part 1 in 1605. He publishes part 2 in 1615. And whenever you see the giant, like 1,000-page Don Quixote, it's those 2 parts are what you're seeing. And then he would go on to die in 1616. So he dies the year after he publishes the second part of his magnum opus, right? It's thought that he died from diabetes, which was, incurable. They didn't have untreatable, I guess is the way to put that. And there's this whole thing of his remains were lost for a while. The place where his bones were buried got renovated in 1673. His bones were lost, and they actually just found them in 2015. So
Whoa,
in 2015,
seriously? How do they know?
Yeah, that thing about the hand being shot, and I think he has a rib injury from his time in. While he was a prisoner for 5 years, he tried to escape a bunch of times, and I think he got hurt during that. Anyway, they when they found,
Take it back about his like.
I guess that's kind of interesting, but anyway, all this reading the story. I don't know how you all do prep. I way over prepare on the things that don't matter and then way under prepare for everything else. But to read the story of the archaeologist as they find the bones, they see the crack in the bone and realize this is Don Quixote. It's just this moment of silence as they realize what they found.
Where did they find it? Like, if you're renovating a place, what they do? Throw the bones in the trash, and they had to look in the local dump?
It's not the trash necessarily, but there are like these alcoves essentially in the. It's not a monastery. I guess what's it called for? It's a convent, I guess. I think that's right. And essentially, there are these little alcoves where they were put in. So not the main place where the bones go, but kind of off to the side. And they thought it was unmarked, but when they used, I don't know what archaeologists used, but it had MC Miguel de Cervantes
QR code, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. On the front, and
that's got to hold your phone
Cervantes.
Oh wow, it's
have to phone it real steady.
Yeah, that was the real problem, is that they were just rushed too much. Yeah,
early Nokias were terrible. QR
just the worst. Yeah, those early 16 Nokias were the worst.
So he was
sturdy though.
So he was in body overflow, like bones overflow in the
kind of. Yeah. But, well, actually, that's super true, because he was buried there with the bones of his wife. And I forget I know he had one daughter, and I don't know if her bones were there too, but there were many bones that were there, but among them were Cervantes's. So anyway, that's the dude himself. So just kind of a guy who happened to write this incredible novel. This is a weird thing about him. There's another famous person who's alive during this time, a Mr. Bill Shakespeare, and they both died on the same day. They both died. Wait for it. They either both died on April 22nd, or one is on April 22nd and one is on April 23rd.
Crazy.
I will further complicate this by saying that Spain and England were on different calendars, so they didn't actually die on the same day, but they died on the same date. Is that a weird thing?
Yeah, it's frustrating.
Yeah, exactly. So, but anyway, they died around the same date in the same year.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I've been on the same date with a girl, and we were on different calendars.
But she's 10 days away.
Time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. Anyway, so April 22nd, 1616 is when he dies. That part we know. And yeah, he didn't make a ton of money off this book, and it wasn't really super popular until after he died, which seems like the story of most authors, which is a bummer.
That's why I don't feel bad when no one bought my first book.
Did you actually publish a book?
No.
Please publish a book.
But I feel like
I would read your book.
That's a fun little attitude to keep. If you're like constantly failing, you're like, it's okay.
I'm probably great.
I'm probably great. Gonna be famous.
Got to be confident.
People just don't know.
I'm okay with that. I would read both of y'all's books. I would review y'all's books, maybe favorably, on this podcast if you did that.
Can't imagine a book I wrote would be like so rambly and.
You mean kind of like my podcast episodes? Is that Anyway. Okay. So what is this book about? So we will only cover the briefest of intro to this material. We'll talk a little bit about, I guess, the setting. We'll talk about the point you were talking about, Graham, of like this being an important book.
And so it's all stories.
Yes.
And you have this recurring characters.
Yep.
Do you have any recurring characters besides Don Quixote and his buddy? What's his name?
Sancho Panza, which I think means Sancho Panza, which I believe means holy belly or some version of that. They are Rocinante, his horse, is also Rocinante, kind of in a weird way, a recurring character, very much has a personality. And there's some that are common to different chapters, but there are like 700 characters in this book. So
yowzer.
Yeah, so 700 characters and 1,000 pages. Like, you're moving pretty fast through these characters. And
it sounds nothing like my Poetic Edda episodes. 1,000 characters, moving way too fast.
Except they don't all die in this one. It's much more lighthearted than that. So
fewer birds.
I'm trying to think.
Give me an example of like a typical story.
You have me jumping around.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's fine. I mean, the most famous story is Don Quixote comes upon a set of windmills. Mm-hmm. You have me off.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Comes upon a set of windmills. He sees them and thinks that a magician has, sees them, and what he sees is not windmills, but he sees giants. Mm-hmm. So he goes and he charges after them, runs into one of these windmills. His lance, he breaks everything. He breaks his lance. He falls off his horse. He then, almost by the shock of him running directly into a giant windmill, looks up and sees, these are windmills, and then says to Sancho Panza, some great magician has turned these giants into windmills. Right. So he sees a thing clearly, but has this made up story of what has actually happened. We'll talk about another one of his stories in a second, tied in with kind of the translation thing. Before we get into I've already told it, whatever. Who is this Don Quixote character? Graham, did you say this at the beginning of the recording, or were you saying this beforehand? Who is this Don Quixote fellow?
He's someone who thinks he's a knight, right? Or he is a knight.
Ooh.
Is he?
Is he a knight?
I don't know. That's all I know about him.
That's fine. He's
old. He's an old man.
He's in his 50s, I believe. Does that an old man make? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. He is in his 50s. He is a gentleman, I guess is the way to put it. He's there's like this class of people, I'm more familiar with it in England around the same time, maybe a little later, where they have an income that comes off of their property, but they don't do very much. So like a man of leisure.
Sounds great.
I guess. He is one of these people. So he doesn't work because he doesn't have to. He has money coming in. We talked about this a long time ago. Most often that's from the property you have. There's a rent that is paid from people that use your land. They pay you that money.
Huh.
So you don't have to work.
Does this still exist?
You can own land. Yeah, sure. You can rent it out. It's not as prevalent as it was 500 years ago. So he lives off of that money and doesn't do very much and gets into this bad habit of reading stories about knights.
It's like Ivanhoe.
Yeah, but the ones that they actually point to are like Spanish specific knights. So I don't it's not in our same cultural background, I guess I would say. And also most of them aren't famous enough to have lasted to today. Like,
so the romantic tales of the troubadours.
Yes, exactly. Also, his sentences are very long, so it's always very hard to find the beginning. Now, you must understand that during his idle moments, which accounted for most of the year, this Hidalgo took to reading books of chivalry with such relish and enthusiasm that he almost forgot about his hunting and even running his property, and his foolish curiosity reached such extremes that he sold acres of arable land to buy these books of chivalry and took home as many of them as he could find. He liked none of them, this is still the same sentence, he liked none of them so much as those by the famous Feliciano de Silva, because the brilliance of the prose and all the intricate language seemed a treasure to him, never more so, this is going on so long, but the gag there is that Feliciano de Silva is a real author who was like a hack, like wrote trashy.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It was like airport novels.
Yes, the equivalent of that, exactly. So he quotes, this is...
The ones you buy at the airport.
Yeah, no, that was spot on.
It's like Jack Steele is a spy.
He quotes from this Feliciano fellow. This is a quote from one of his books. I believe this is an actual quote. The reason for the unreason to which my reason is subjected so weakens my reason that I have reason to complain of your beauty. The lofty heavens, which with their stars divinely fortify you in your divinity and make you meritorious of the merits merited by your greatness. That's anyway.
AJ, how did you not like this? This is right up your alley.
It's charming. It's really funny.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
So he reads this, and in short, our Hidalgo was soon so absorbed in these books that his nights were spent reading from dusk till dawn, and his days from dawn till dusk, until the lack of sleep and the excess of reading withered his brain, and he went mad. Everything he read in these books took possession of his imagination. So he'd
been there.
Yeah, I mean his.
I was gonna say I see some of those symptoms in people walking around our school.
Yeah.
You're talking about the three of us right now, right? So his brain is straight up withered by reading books, and he begins to think of himself as a character in these books. He thinks that he is a knight, and
sounds about right.
That sounds about right. So him realizing that he is a knight means that he has to find a squire, which eventually he will find Sancho Panza, who is just like a peasant dude from around town, who the running gag is that he's smarter than Don Quixote. Don Quixote realizes he needs a woman to be fighting for the honor of. That's where Dulcinea comes from. I believe Dulcinea never actually appears in the book. So he talks about this woman who he never actually talks to, and as far as we know, does not know that Don Quixote cares about her. Or
wasn't she just like some peasant girl?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
No one brought this up as their background, but there's a, I think, famous musical version of Don Quixote called The Man of La Mancha, where Dulcinea is one of the characters in it, but that she's not actually in the book proper.
So he's a fool. He's a lovable fool.
Sure. But I don't know if he is.
Is he not lovable?
No, he's lovable for sure.
But you don't know if he's a fool? But if he thinks he's a knight and he's gone bazonkers.
But do you not... so there's a... I guess we'll move into the translation part. And the history of this book often, again, makes it seem like a more serious book than it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And so... and even the interpretation of Man of La Mancha is that he is a knight and he is fighting for noble things. He just happens to be slightly delusional. Is that... Graham, is that like a thing that you're familiar with in thinking of this book? There's like a heroic.
The thing that I
quality
was
to him.
familiar with is that he's fighting for noble things, but he's now like living in a time where fighting for noble things isn't needed anymore.
That's fair. That makes him sound like a kind of tragic figure,
Yeah.
but he doesn't see himself that way.
Well, that's what makes it tragic, right?
But hold on to that thought.
Okay.
Any other thoughts, AJ, before jumping on with getting into how this has been translated before? Do you have some like sense of what the book is about? Or
Yeah, I think I'm on board.
Okay.
I was also wondering if this was the, Sancho and the Don were the basis for Samwise and Frodo.
Oh, maybe.
But I don't see any Rosinante in there. I don't think the ring counts.
Do they have a
Maybe Gollum.
Is there no? They don't have a. No, there's no horse.
Nah,
that's
not
like
really.
important to them.
Yeah, I don't think it is.
Plus, Frodo's not a fool.
Frodo's not a fool.
And he liked to draw from the Norse, I think, more than
this. But you're kind of doing the work that Susan Weisbauer does of trying to connect that theme of a journey, and so that idea is interpreted by many authors.
So where's he going if it's a journey? Does he have like we must get to the so-and-so?
Nope, he's wandering
Sancho?
to neither of them.
He's just looking for things to do like a knight?
He wants to right wrongs. He wants to right wrongs, which is a story we'll get to in a little bit.
That's a great quality to have.
That's funny because I think at the end of I just read a summary of all the King Arthur literature. I don't know how accurate it was to the originals, but at the end, there are so many knights wandering around looking for adventures that eventually they just kind of solve everything.
Yes.
And so there's just a bunch of knights sort of just riding around like nothing to do.
No more adventures.
No more ladies are in trouble. They've all been saved.
I like it. So this leads us into if you're gonna read this book, which you should. I'm reading the Penguin Classics version, which is great. It's translated by John Rutherford. Susan Weisbauer recommends the translation by Edith Grossman. It's a 2003 translation, but she does make the point that Edith Grossman's is more of an interpretation. She calls it a collaboration between himself, Edith Grossman, and Smollett. Wait, hold on. Edith Grossman and Tobias Smollett's translations are recommended. It's Smollett's that is closer to a collaboration between himself and Cervantes to produce the popular novel. So, but with John Rutherford's, I'll just read a little bit from his to kind of get to the point. Most people in translating this book have focused on the like important literary side of the book. Again, calling it the greatest novel means that there must be some seriousness to this. This is best seen through the title that is given to Don Quixote. Is this a?
I don't know what it is. What is it?
In Man of La Mancha, there's a song to it. It's the Knight of the Woeful Countenance. Knight of the Woeful Countenance. If to give someone that name, like describe the person who receives the name Knight of the Woeful Countenance.
Someone who doesn't have any sort of hope in the future.
Sure.
Right.
So despair, maybe.
So he has a despairing, or when you see him, he's
Feeling bad.
He's feeling bad. He's just a big grump.
Sure. And for someone to think up the phrase Knight of the Woeful Countenance, like what kind of person would come up with that title? Is that who would you think would give Don Quixote that title, given it's kind of like an over-the-top kind of flowery language, right?
Is it a character in the book or are you asking about the author?
The character in the book. Describe what that character would be like to, again, when's the last time you used woeful and countenance? Do you know what I mean?
So it would be someone noble.
Sure. So maybe another knight would give him that title.
And someone familiar with his character.
Sure.
I feel like it might have been Sancho Panza.
Yeah, so in fact, it comes from Sancho Panza. The point that...
Point Hindenburg.
It's not quiz show. The Donkey Quiz Show was our only quiz show. John Rutherford's point is that Sancho Panza, an illiterate peasant fellow, would not use the word woeful countenance. In the original Spanish, it's El Caballero de la Triste Figura. It's El Caballero is the knight, de la of the Triste is sad, Figura is figure. So the knight of the sad figure is like the direct translation of that. This phrase has been translated a number of ways. Knight of the rueful countenance, sorrowful figure, sad countenance. and a few others here. The point Rutherford is making is that those miss the point of why Sancho Panza gives this name to Don Quixote in the first place.
So would Sancho see him as like he's rich and he's sad and he doesn't have anything to do, and he's just like, and he thinks he's a hero.
You're making it sound like a sad version, right?
Yeah.
Well, let me read you. This is chapter 19. In chapter 19, Sancho and Don Quixote are walking along. They see these figures dressed in white walking along carrying a dead body. Mm-hmm. Don Quixote looks at that and realizes, quote unquote, that they're ghosts. And so to save Sancho Panza, he goes and he fights the ghosts. But
they're just like two dudes carrying a body.
It's like 8 dudes and it's a bunch of priests. And they're literally carrying a body from one town to the like graveyard where it's supposed to go.
Well, if they're in robes, I can see how he thought they were ghosts.
Yeah, sure. It's definitely the most
White
logical
sheets are
thing
pretty common ghost garb.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not wrong about that.
Yeah.
What
And
ghosts look like.
so you're not.
White sheet, 2 eye holes.
Yeah,
I've seen that.
Yeah, I saw that movie. Isn't that Ghost Story? Sancho Panza is watching this scene as Don Quixote beats up on a bunch of unarmed priests. Sancho was watching it all, amazed at his master's courage, and saying to himself, "It's true. This master of mine is just as brave and strong as he says he is," which I think is a tongue-in-cheek reference.
Because he's beating up a bunch.
Because he's beating up a bunch of like probably old priest dudes. Well, the priests are like, "I don't want to deal with this," so they abandon the body. One priest has his leg broken by Don Quixote, and so then starts answering questions to Don Quixote. They talk back and forth for a while. The priest eventually tells Don Quixote where he's from and where he's going. And then Sancho Panza is just kind of looking at Don Quixote, and then this happens. This is a quote from Sancho Panza. "If by any chance those gentlemen want to know the name of the valiant adventurer that did this to them, you can tell them he's the famous Don Quixote de la Mancha, also known as the Knight of the Sorry Face." That's how Rutherford translates that phrase, the Knight of the Sorry Face. The Bachelor of Arts, the priest, started riding away slowly, and Don Quixote asked Sancho why he'd called him the Knight of the Sorry Face, and at that moment in particular, why did he name him that? "All right, I'll tell you," replied Sancho. "I was just looking at you by the light of the poor bloke's torch, and the truth is that at this moment you're the sorriest sight I've ever clapped eyes on. It must be because of being tired after your fight, or else losing all those teeth." So literally, like, the priest is holding a torch.
It's a joke.
It's 100% a joke, but
so it's not this like tragic romantic name of the knight that like
it's in the story.
He's just
he looks ugly because he got his teeth bashed out. I think it's the story before where a bunch
Sancho's
of
making fun of him.
Yes, a bunch of shepherds threw rocks at him and knocked out his teeth, and he's just looking like real ghastly in the light of the fire. And so the Knight of the Sorry Face, because he looks real gross.
That's pretty awesome.
It is great, and this is Rutherford's comment. Translators have decided that this. I didn't read this. Maybe I'll read this in a second. Sancho Panza gives his reason. I just read that to you. But Don Quixote disregards Sancho's explanation and accepts his new title as an appropriately lofty expression of his noble suffering, a heroic epithet rooted in the long and glorious tradition of the knights errant of olden days. Graham, your interpretation, maybe. Mm-hmm. Translators have decided that this ambiguity is untranslatable and have suppressed the joke. And that's where we get into ill-favored face, rueful countenance. It misses the point of that's not how a peasant would have talked. It's not the English equivalent of what a peasant would have said. And also, it misses the whole point of the joke that's being made right there.
So Sancho's
Which is that he's all uggo.
Yeah.
Yes, that he's an uggo.
So Sancho's making fun of him. But so this is kind of interesting because it seems like Don Quixote is someone who is taking in all this stuff of his life, of the world, these stories, Sancho, but the sort of the prism that he sort of filters it through, like his own internal filter, already has like a predetermined outflow.
Yes.
Like it's going to be a romantic story of knighthood, regardless of what happens.
Yes.
And when he sees regular old life happening, a bunch of dudes carrying a body, it becomes this sort of, a story of high drama and ghosts.
Even though it's not true, right? That's not what.
Even when his servant is insulting him and saying, dude, your teeth.
You're looking real ugly.
You're looking real
ugly. Yeah. He's like, yes, the Knight of Woeful Countenance.
And he takes it as a title, and he'll continue using it, not realizing that it's his squire making fun of him the entire time. But that's where I'm not entirely sure.
Sorry face is a good translation.
I like
the
that.
Night of the Sorry Face. It's a pretty sorry looking face.
Because I'm not sure Cervantes's view, in some sense. This is where me reading the second part will be helpful, because that's where I think that's where I'm told it gets more serious, or it's the end of the book. You know what I mean? That's where they are interpreting Don Quixote's life. In the moment, he's made fun of by essentially everyone that he comes across. Again, whether they're below him in terms of station. Again, as Hidalgo, he does have some like level of respect that he's kind of due, and he doesn't get that from anyone because he's a crazy guy. Just along the lines of translation, because this one is also funny. This is from it's from the book, but it's quoted in the introduction. The character's name is Sansón. Sansón embraced, so this is how Rutherford translates it. Sansón embraced Don Quixote and begged to be sent news of his fortunes, both good and bad, to rejoice at the latter or grieve over the former, as the laws of friendship required. Don Quixote promised to do so. What's the joke in that? I'll read it again.
Yeah, one more time.
Sansón embraced Don Quixote and begged to be sent news of his fortunes, both good and bad, to rejoice at the latter or grieve over the former, as the laws of friendship required. Don Quixote promised to do so. What's the joke?
Because he's saying, he's like, if you tell me that you had good fortune, I can be upset about it.
Exactly. So it's, and the book is full of these like little witticisms.
That if you're not paying attention.
Yes. It just sails on by.
So it's just everybody dunking on Don Quixote and he doesn't realize it?
Yes, which makes it even better. But but in a weird way.
Oh man, the poor guy.
Okay. But this is how other people.
Does he have any sort of cruelty to him? Like, obviously beating up the priest is not good, but he's doing it thinking, like, is he a lovable?
I find him.
Or do you look at him and you're just like, oh, buddy?
It's both, right? Like, he literally, his mind is melted. Like, he can't help it in some sense. So there's a pity aspect there, but also he's having the time of his life. He thinks he's actually fighting ghosts and fighting giants. And even when reality faces him, he doesn't deal with that. I'll get to that in a second, just to finish out on this part of this one quote. So, there's this little witticism in there about rejoicing at the bad and being sad about the good that happens to Don Quixote. One of the 20th century translators shies away and writes, Samson, so changes the name from a Spanish name to an anglicized name. Samson embraced the knight and begged him to let him know what his luck might be, so that he might either rejoice or mourn as the laws of friendship required. So the joke is totally erased. Another recent translator also refuses the fence and says, Then Samson gave our knight a farewell embrace, begging him, as the laws of friendship required, to send news of his luck, whether good or bad, so the one could be rejoiced in and the other be grieved over. So it's totally
missing
erased.
The joke.
Totally missing the joke in that one. The joke has totally disappeared at that point. And that's where I wonder what translation you had started with, AJ, because again, there are stilted translations that are just making what should be a weekly comedy serial into something it's not. Just a really boring story about a crazy guy who thinks he's a knight, right?
Yeah, I wonder.
So your thesis is, or this guy's thesis at the beginning of this book is that Don Quixote, for some reason, achieved a status of being highbrow literature and was translated as such, but in reality, it's sort of missing the jokes. Yeah.
It is literally a show about nothing. I'll get to, just the other funny thing from this introduction, to make his point, Rutherford has to quote an article called Don Quixote as a Funny Book. That's in his footnotes, and I thought that was just a charming thing.
It's kind of like the same thing I had with Moby Dick. When I was going into Moby Dick, I thought it was going to be this book of like high drama and such pathos about hunting the whale, and I did not realize that, it was sort of 5 books in one, and 4 of them were hilarious.
Yeah. There's just such a ton of nonsense in there that I just love. Like, alas, Flask was a butterless man. Like, first in, last out. Last in, first out. Never got butter.
But Moby Dick has both, because it's also serious at certain points too. You're just saying there are moments of humor that are
there
missed.
are a ton of jokes in there.
Is there any seriousness in Don Quixote?
I think so. You're having me jump around. This is good. No, keep me on my toes. I don't know what to. You tell me if this is humorous or not. So part of this maybe is actually an episode about why you should write notes in your books. So this is one of the few times I actually made margin notes in here, and so it's just funny to watch the things that I found fascinating 4 years ago when I was actually trying to read through this book. And I also kind of hate it because I keep doing this thing where I'm like, I identify with this part of Don Quixote, or like I get this thing from Sancho Panza, or at the end of this chapter, which is the windmill chapter, this makes me think, I'm not going to read that. Sorry. It actually made me think of specific people of when faced with evidence, they ignore it, and then, Anyway, I'll read the part. So you all have heard this, the windmill. I talked about it just a second ago. The part of it that, Graham, I think was your question, whether something serious happens. Is that how you phrased it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like tilting at windmills has also become this, I don't know, there just seems to be like an interpretive framework around Don Quixote that sounds like it may be not justified. But I don't know enough about it to have a take on that.
When you say tilting at windmills, what does that phrase?
Well, usually it's like people, the way that I've sort of had people talk, or when people say that is like, the lost cause and getting on your horse one last time to go after that one last battle.
Right.
And it's always struck me strange because it's like, well, but the windmills, it's like not even real.
Right.
That's. I think that may be the context I've heard it in, where tilting at windmills means they're fighting against something that doesn't exist, or an imaginary foe.
Yeah, that's
right?
just Googling it. Tilting at windmills typically means attacking imaginary enemies, which is the literal thing that happens. I think the question is whether that is romantic or not. Is it romantic or foolish? I guess is maybe the way to.
I'd put that solidly in foolish.
Sure, because in the literal sense, he's attacking a windmill. Again, but
he wants to live in this idealized world.
Yes.
And
do you identify?
And he's just sort of walking around in like the regular world, and everyone's just like, "Bah, stop being a blah. You're a doofus. Stop smacking me. I'm not a ghost."
Yeah.
And
I think it's at its...
To me, that's where I wonder if the tragedy's coming in. It's kind of like a funny King Lear, you know? It's like an aging person who's lost his marbles.
The man himself is tragic.
Yeah.
I don't know if he is, though. He is living out...
His dreams?
Yeah, he is. He's living out a life he's happy with, and none of the reality of the situation gets through to him. Like, is he the realization of the live your truth, or you know what I mean? Like, he's living his best life.
Yeah.
It just happens not to be in conformity to reality.
Well, it's the ignorance is bliss, right? It's taking the pill and going back in the matrix.
Sure.
Because it all tastes like chicken, right?
Is that? I thought it was when he's eating the steak. Is that what that's from?
Yeah, I don't remember. Something about chicken.
Yeah.
So the ending of the windmill story, I made fun of people who get serious messages out of this, but I mean, this is a thing that apparently very much was impactful to me 4 years ago. So again, Don Quixote sees a windmill. He attacks it. He gets himself busted up because, to quote the book, they were definitely windmills. That is an actual quote. Thank you, John Rutherford. So, Don Quixote gets beaten up, and then, "For God's sake," said Sancho, "didn't I tell you to be careful what you were doing? Didn't I tell you they were only windmills, and only someone with windmills on the brain could have failed to see that?" "Not at all, friend Sancho," replied Don Quixote. "Affairs of war, even more than others, are subject to continual change. All the more so as I believe, indeed I am certain, that the same sage Freston, who stole my library and my books, has just turned these giants into windmills, to deprive me of the glory of my victory. Such is the enmity he feels for me. But in the end, his evil arts will avail him little against the might of my sword. God's will be done," replied Sancho Panza. And then it goes on.
I wonder if the translation there was, instead of windmills on the brain, like windmill brains.
Yeah, maybe. I wonder. Again, that's where if I were better at Spanish, I would be able to just read you directly from the Spanish.
Only a man with windmill brains would be told in windmills.
And there's a lot, translation is the thing I find interesting. This is one of the first essays that the preface to this book was one of the first introductions to that idea of the translator has a view on the book, and that view on the book will determine the work that they produce, right? It's not just applying a dictionary to a work in another language. It's knowing the book deeply enough to write this well. The John Rutherford's PhD, I believe, is in some version of, I forget the exact name, but it's essentially like Spanish culture, like Spanish Middle Age culture. Like, this is the time he studies and has deep respect for. Okay. We've gone through Cervantes. We've talked about kind of an intro. We talked about Night of the Willful Countenance. I think that might have been all the stuff I really wanted to say, since we have a little bit of extra time. There are all these things throughout the book that, again, I appreciate Rutherford keeping in. The opening line, "In a village in La Mancha, the name of which I cannot quite recall, there lived not long ago one of those country gentlemen or hidalgos who keep a lance in a rack." He makes fun of this class of people And then they have this whole thing about not knowing what Don Quixote's real name is. His surname said to have been Quijada or Quesada. Quijada is I guess a jawbone. And Quesada is cheesecake. So like just from the very beginning, it's like not taking the story seriously at all.
No one can remember jawbone, cheesecake.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter. And I had meant to say earlier the premise of the book. There's a prologue to it where Cervantes presents Don Quixote as an actual figure. So it's him and a buddy talking about this real person, Don Quixote. They have to tell this story. He's this famous knight. This is a quote from the friend. He's the light and mirror of all knight errantry. And that's how the book is set up. So that's why, again, I have trouble saying whether is Don Quixote tragic or is he actually some realization of the ideal of a knight. Sure, he's out of time, and sure, he's delusional, but he's genuinely a kind person. His interactions with women in particular, he's just so kind and treats them as ladies, and they often don't know what to do about it. But
it's even women that don't deserve it. If I remember, it's like hag women washing clothes, and
who we call
they have lost their beauty. They are not anything to look at anymore.
But to him, they're queens or princesses.
So do you think there's something about like that kind of life of virtue needs to have some kind of detachment from reality? Like so one of the things, and this is something that I talk about in 10th grade when we talk about knights, is that knighthood tends to look at the world symbolically, kind of, especially when it comes to other people. Sure. So you're not dealing with particular woman with a particular like life. You're dealing with womanhood.
Yes.
Womanhood embodied in the examples.
Sure.
So you have a disposition that you were supposed to have to womanhood. You treat them like Mary herself. And then every time that you come across a noble woman, you take up that disposition and comport. And so there's kind of this like disambiguation with the world that knighthood has, where you're treating things as symbolic representations of a moral way of living.
Sure.
And so it sounds like the book's sort of saying like, here's somebody that is buying into that.
Sure. And living
whole
that life
hog,
out. Yeah, sure.
and is living this life, seeing everything as a disembodied moral landscape. And then you've got Sancho is just like, oh my goodness.
As a realist, right?
As a realist, he's walking around being like, dude, it's just a windmill.
Yeah.
And I guess the open question is like, who is that? Like, who's the happier person, or who's the, is Don Quixote wrong for living? He's clearly not in reality, but
right.
You're like you said, he's still. It sounds like he's still a force of good, if not only a force of maybe.
But this is
other than breaking the legs of priests.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but that's the flip side of it, right. Is that he's somebody that is going to get the particulars wrong.
Sure.
But this is the ultra classic sci-fi question. Is it better to live in absolute happiness and bliss or to live in reality, right? It's the Matrix question. It's the question of everyone who has like an AI virtual reality option, or they can, be plunked into some virtual world that makes them happier. I mean, if wisdom is, I had to talk with my kids, if wisdom is knowing the world for what it is in all its truest forms, then, and wisdom is one of those things that leads to happiness, then I don't know if a road of ignorance can be a road to happiness, right?
Maybe.
It will. This road will inevitably lead him to sorrows, right? I mean, maybe not sorrows he even realizes, but he's had all his teeth knocked out.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah,
when he could be a noble man living and reading and running his property, he is missing out on that good life to go and run himself into windmills and break his bones.
Sure. I do think part of it's also saying that life of leisure led to this. Because he had nothing to do with his time and read a bunch of books, he became deluded.
So maybe this book is just an invective against bad literature.
Could be.
Maybe. Do you think there's something to it where it's talking about these two sides of a personality, two sides of viewing a situation? You've got the Sancho realistic side, and then you've got the sort of romanticized, disembodied, seeing something as a symbolic gesture. So, like if you watch a sports movie, like winning the high school football game is sort of seen it's a symbol of your life and what kind of man do you want to be when you grow up, and you show it on that field versus we're now we're
Put the ball in the end zone.
Now we're 5-2.
Right.
And we're gonna go. It's just like there's the reality of it, and then there's the romanticized story of it, and it just sort of seems like the story is dealing with both sides of those.
This
of
is
that
this is
coin.
why I had so much trouble with sports movies. I was
Right.
like, it's
just one
ball.
game.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
It's touchdown. You still have to go to college after this. You still have to go to your job. Like, you won the championship.
Still got to pay taxes.
Yeah, taxes are coming for you, but there are windmills, bro. Like, I feel like I'm the windmills guy.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering if it's
Sancho.
if it's playing off those two sort of views of, or if saying both of those things are needed on the journey. I don't know.
Maybe, but also, I think it's just supposed to be an enjoyable series of stories that are very funny. Again, like this book, almost it feels like story time before you go to bed. Like, what did Don Quixote and what kind of crazy hijinks do they get in today? And it just continues that over and over. And there are moments where, again, I find the windmill scene fascinating for the fact that at the end, Don Quixote sees the windmills, but tells himself a story that they're actually giants. Like, he has a moment of clarity, but his narrative is wrong. And so he stays in his narrative. He chooses the narrative over the facts. I think that's like an interesting insight. I don't think, is that like, is that just me finding a lesson? Again, does that have anything to do with the book? Is what I'm
No,
trying
that's
to say.
that's sort of my point. Is
Yeah.
he sees reality. He sticks with the narrative,
Right.
And then he's got his buddy that sees reality and sticks with reality, and just the fact that we know that human beings do that. Like, you can see what's real, but you sort of like
Believe
slip
something else.
back into
Yes.
Actually, do you listen to the Eric Weinstein podcast where he read that essay about the person who was witnessing the beginnings of the Holocaust and was trying to write to convince people? So it's this is a dark turn to this conversation, but he sort of makes reference to that psychological thing that people have where you can see reality for what it is, but the reality of it is too hard, so you slip back into the narrative. Is there any sort of line in Don Quixote where when Don Quixote realizes that they're actually just windmills and he wants to live in the nightly realm, the imaginary realm, and so he slips into it?
Yeah, I need to actually read the second half of this book. My understanding is that's similar to what happens toward the end of the book. He has there's a person who dresses up as a different knight to chase after Don Quixote. Eventually, it's a superhero movie, right? No, so chases after Don Quixote, defeats him in combat. Don Quixote is then ordered by the knight that beats him to go home, and that starts the decline of Don Quixote. So I wonder,
is it just like a local townsperson that was like, all right,
it's someone from college.
put an end to this.
I forget where the college is.
Yeah.
But I'm sure it's not in La Mancha. La Mancha is like middle of nowhere in the context of this.
Scholars ruining everything.
Yeah, seriously, I feel that way. But again, I think it's a book that is not for all of that. It's not for finding the interpretive frame for the book. It is a book of enjoyable stories, and I think that's why I'm trying to talk about Cervantes as just a dude. Again, these feel like stories that any father could come up with in talking to their son or daughter before bed at night. And again, that's part of
I
Crazy old Looney
maintain that
Night.
you can over-intellectualize.
Thank you. Good for you. But in the same way that, yep.
Yeah, I was just about to say, what I really think this is about is it's about technology.
Yeah, sure, that's exactly right. Yeah.
He was depending on the old
He does
technology.
have a lance. He does have a, yeah.
And that technology fails him, and then but the new technology is found within. It's where he says
he does actually have a helmet that fails him. Is that? Maybe this is. Let's do a
I just wanted to
dissertation
harken it back
class.
to
No,
your
the
Does he have a
last
your
sword
Beowulf
name?
podcast.
He has a
that
sword
made
that
me
he
want
finds
to
on the wall.
Is it named Graham?
Maybe you want to scream.
How did you know?
Sword named Graham. I actually thought about having a sword named or sword made and then naming it Graham.
Oh, yeah.
After you, best friend at my side.
This is good. Anyway, it's this book is
Keep 'em
great
close.
and funny, and y'all are having a weird side conversation about naming swords. I'll just all I want to do is read quotes from this book all the time. And this makes no sense, but I'll wrap up with the prologue, so figure that one out. The two friends are going back and forth about how to write a book and how to write a book that's good and that will sell a lot. And the friend is saying, just put in a lot of Latin phrases. People will think it's a really smart book. And then they just have these random Latin phrases in the middle. Mm-hmm. And then they talk about how to cite stuff in the book. And so they go, as for providing endnotes, you can easily do it like this. If you include a giant in your book, make him Goliath. And this alone, which will hardly be any trouble for you, will give you a splendid endnote, because you will be able to say, the giant Goliath, or Goliath, was a Philistine whom the shepherd David slew with a stone from his sling in the vale of the Terebinth, according to what is narrated in the Book of Kings, in the chapter where you'll find it written.
In the chapter while you're...
it actually goes on even further from there.
Oh, does it really?
Anyway,
So
it's
they're
just
talking about how to be
how to appear like you're
pretentious.
very
How to
smart.
appear-
Yeah. So
appear-
anyway,
And this is the original author?
yes, this is Cervantes' prologue to the book. Again, the overarching story is that Don Quixote was a real person in the context of the book. He wasn't actually.
Yeah.
And it's Cervantes trying to figure out, like, how can I be worthy to write this book when I'm such a simpleton? And the friend's like, just act the part. Like, find some random Latin phrases and put it in. No one's going to look it up. Like, just say whatever you want to.
It reminds me a lot of The Princess Bride, which I read this summer.
Yeah.
Because have you guys read it?
No.
Mm-mm.
The actual story is weird because the author talks about what he's doing is abridging this old famous Italian novel. And he remembers it from when he was a kid and all this high adventure. And then he goes back to read it, and half of it is politics and the other half is like trade stuff. And he's like, this is all nonsense. I want the fun. And so he abridges it and then writes this novel. And so you'll get these asides from the author in between when he's doing the publishing process and trying to figure out all these things and give it to his kids and have it edited. It's all made up. He just wrote the novel and wrote himself into it in the editing process. It's kind of the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's a delight, by the way.
good.
If you're looking for something to read to kids and have them have a lot of fun, do voices with Princess Bride.
I like that.
It's great.
Yeah, I guess we can. I guess at some point one of you was asking about whether there are things that connect all the stories to each other. In the prologue, he makes reference again to these like goofy Latin phrases that don't actually mean anything. Cervantes actually uses those in the story. Then it's like it's hilarious. Like,
he does it?
Yes. So
That's
like
great.
it's presented as like this conversation with his friend, and then he actually takes the advice.
Do you get an end note?
From the translator, not from. That's actually a good point. I'm so sorry. But like, I believe there is a giant named Goliath. Like all that stuff actually happens in the story, and
That's
it's just
funny.
It's just
That's delightful.
anyway. I again, for this being like the first novel, I thought it would be like a bore and a slog, and it's actually just a delightful and hilarious read. It's designed, you can pick up and read any chapter on its own. You don't have to like start from the beginning if you don't want to. If you know Sancho Panza is a realist and Don Quixote is kind of crazy, you can understand every one of the stories that happens. So anyway, it's a treat. At some point when I read like, the second half of this book, I will come back and talk about all the serious stuff. But for right now, it's just like, it's the Netflix of classics. So please, it's great.
Cool.
So check it out. It's
That's
wonderful.
awesome.
That's all I got.
Well, thanks, Thomas. I realize I have a copy of it in my classroom. Maybe I'll bring it home.
You should.
Because
Is it a good
fun.
You know who translated?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
It's the green-spined Veritas version.
It's probably horrible, right?
Yeah.
It's probably super boring.
That's my guess.
I think that's the one I read.
So this has been Classical Stuff You Should Know. You can email us at theguys@classicalstuff.net. You can patronize us on Patreon by going to patreon.com/classicalstuff. And therein you can find some things to subscribe to, help us out with producing this podcast. And there's some fun rewards that we've got going on in there for subscribers. You can find us on the twits at Classical Stuff, CLSSCAL Stuff. And you can find all of our episodes on classicalstuff.net. So thanks for listening. This is the guys signing off. Graham, AJ, and Thomas saying goodbye.
See ya.
Bye.